Put those groceries in my cart. Now. Those were the exact words that stopped me in my tracks on what was supposed to be a quiet Saturday afternoon. I had just wrapped up a long week at work, the kind of week that drains you to your core, and all I wanted was to run into the grocery store, grab a few essentials, some bread, milk, eggs, maybe a little comfort food, and head back home to enjoy a peaceful evening. Nothing fancy. Nothing complicated. Just a normal errand like everyone else. But life has a funny way of testing your patience when you least expect it. I was standing in line, placing my groceries on the belt, when I felt eyes boring into the back of my head. I turned slightly and saw this young man, maybe in his early 20s, tall, thin, with this smug smirk stretched across his face. At first, I ignored him. People stare sometimes, no big deal. But then, out of nowhere, he barked those words at me, demanding I hand over my groceries as if I was some servant meant to obey. I blinked, confused, thinking I must have misheard him. Surely no one could be that bold, that entitled, in the middle of a crowded grocery store. But no, he wasn't joking. His expression hardened, his hand motioning toward my bags like they were rightfully his. I let out a small laugh, not because it was funny, but because I was genuinely stunned. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he mistook me for someone else, maybe he was kidding, maybe this was some weird prank. But his response erased any doubt. I said, "Give me those groceries. People like you should know your place." The shift in the room was immediate. A couple behind us froze, their smiles fading into uncomfortable silence. The cashier, a young woman who'd been cheerfully scanning items, stopped mid-motion and looked up with wide eyes. And me? My stomach turned. I've dealt with plenty of rudeness in my line of work, but this wasn't just rudeness. This was venom. The way he said, "people like you," carried the heavy weight of racism, arrogance, and entitlement. He wasn't asking. He was demanding, and not just my food, he was demanding my dignity. In that moment, I had a choice. I could snap back, let my anger take over, or I could stand firm and let the situation unfold. What he didn't know, and what made this whole thing almost laughable, was that I wasn't just some random man in a grocery store. I am the police commander in my city. The highest-ranking officer in the department. I've faced violent criminals, de-escalated dangerous standoffs, and handled crises most people only see in movies. And here was this kid, puffing out his chest in a supermarket, thinking he could intimidate me with a few cheap words. I kept my voice calm, steady, the way I do when addressing someone who's already teetering on the edge. "Son, these are my groceries. Back off." My tone should have been enough. It usually is. But instead of backing down, he leaned closer, his voice dripping with contempt. He muttered a racial slur under his breath, just loud enough for me and everyone nearby to hear. That's when the room truly froze. The air got thick, heavy with shock and disbelief. A mother pulled her child closer, the man in line behind me shifted uncomfortably, and the cashier's face burned with embarrassment on his behalf. My patience thinned, but I held it together. Losing my temper in public never helps, and besides, I didn't need to prove myself to someone so small-minded. I've always believed that character shows best when you're under fire, and if he wanted to expose his, then so be it. I wasn't going to stoop to his level. But before I could say anything else, another voice pierced through the tension. A voice I recognized instantly. A voice that had caused plenty of headaches in our neighborhood before. "Well, what on earth is going on here?" She demanded, her tone sharp, commanding, and dripping with false authority. I didn't even have to look. I knew exactly who it was. The one and only Karen from our homeowners association. Every neighborhood has one, the self-appointed ruler who thinks the world revolves around them. She was notorious for sending out angry emails about lawn heights, mailbox colors, and trash cans being left out a minute too long. And now, here she was, storming down the grocery aisle in her heels like she owned the place. Her son, of course it was her son, pointed at me, his face twisting into a mask of fake victimhood. "Mom, this guy tried to take my groceries," he whined, as though he hadn't just insulted me in front of half the store. Karen gasped, clutching her chest like she'd just witnessed a robbery. "Oh my goodness! How dare you," she shouted at me. "I know who you are, and I'm calling the police right now. People like you shouldn't even live in our neighborhood." The hypocrisy nearly made me laugh out loud. She had no idea who she was talking to, no idea she was threatening the very person who commanded the officers she was about to call. She whipped out her phone, dialing 911 with theatrical flair, her voice rising as she declared, "Yes, I'd like to report an aggressive man harassing my son." Every word was a lie, spun with the confidence of someone who thought their status would protect them. The employees tried to calm her down, a manager rushed over to intervene, but she waved them all off, determined to turn this into her moment of power. Her son smirked behind her, clearly proud of himself, feeding off her drama. And me? I stood there quietly, letting the scene play out, watching as this mother-son duo dug themselves deeper into a hole they'd never crawl out of. What they didn't know was that their little performance was about to backfire in the most spectacular way possible. Because when you call the police on someone, you'd better be sure you're not calling them on the one person who runs the entire department. And in a matter of minutes, their smug smiles and arrogant confidence would shatter into shock, humiliation, and regret that they'd never forget. If you've ever lived in a neighborhood with a homeowners association, you know exactly the type of person I'm talking about. The kind who struts around like they were elected mayor when really all they did was complain the loudest at a meeting about whose lawn was half an inch too long. That's Karen, our self-appointed queen of the block. She's the kind of person who'll measure your grass with a ruler, send nasty emails if your trash cans are visible for 10 minutes too long, and gossip endlessly about who painted their shutters the wrong shade of beige. She thrives on control. She feeds on drama. And now here she was in her natural habitat, a public place with an audience, ready to put on a performance worthy of a standing ovation, at least in her own mind. The moment she locked eyes on me, her whole face twisted into exaggerated outrage. She didn't ask for facts, didn't want the truth, and she sure didn't want to hear my side of the story. No, she wanted to play the hero, swoop in to defend her son, the same son who just demanded my groceries with racist insults, and put me in my place. She stormed over with her heels clacking like a judge's gavel. The energy in the store shifted again. People in line leaned closer, hungry to see what would happen next. The cashier's hands froze midair. Even the store manager, who had been hovering nearby, suddenly seemed nervous. Before I could open my mouth, her son took the lead, his voice dripping with fake victimhood. "Mom, this guy tried to take my groceries," he whined, painting himself as the poor, innocent target. It was almost impressive how quickly he flipped the story, turning his aggression into victimhood. He pointed his finger at me with wide, pleading eyes, as though I was some kind of monster threatening him. "And Karen?" She gasped so loudly, you would have thought I had just knocked the card out of his hands. She clutched her pearls. Well, not pearls exactly, but some oversized necklace that bounced as she leaned forward dramatically. "How dare you," she snapped at me. Her voice carried through the store, sharp and piercing, ensuring every single shopper could hear her. "I know who you are, and I'm calling the police right now. People like you shouldn't even live in this neighborhood." The words hit like a slap. There it was again, that ugly phrase, "people like you." She didn't bother to hide the venom in her voice. She wanted me to feel small, cornered, powerless. But of course, the irony here was almost too good. She had no clue that the man she was screaming at was the very person who commanded the police she was about to summon. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Without hesitation, she yanked her phone out of her oversized purse and punched in 911 like she was starring in a crime drama. She spoke loud enough for the entire store to hear, her words dripping with exaggeration. "Yes, I'd like to report an aggressive man harassing my son," she announced, glaring at me like she was the brave savior of the day. Her son stood behind her, smirking, his chest puffed out as though he'd already won. He probably thought his mom's performance would shield him from consequences, that her voice and her status in the neighborhood could rewrite reality. Meanwhile, the store staff scrambled. The cashier looked helpless, the manager rushed forward, raising his hands in a plea. "Ma'am, please, let's not escalate things, we can resolve this calmly," he started, but Karen cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. "Don't you tell me how to handle this. This man is dangerous and I'm not going to let him get away with it." She jabbed her finger in my direction with the kind of confidence that comes from years of never being told no. She was in her element now, feeding off the attention. Her voice rose, her gestures grew wilder, and all around us shoppers whispered and gawked. Some pulled out their phones, recording the unfolding scene. I stayed calm, silent, letting her dig deeper. Years of experience had taught me that sometimes silence is the most powerful weapon. Every second she ranted, she exposed herself. Every word she exaggerated made it clearer to everyone watching that this wasn't about truth, it was about power. She wasn't protecting her son. She was performing. And her son? He basked in it, grinning smugly, as if he believed his mother could twist reality to fit their narrative. As she continued barking into the phone, I scanned the crowd. People weren't buying her act. Some shook their heads, others rolled their eyes. A woman whispered to her friend, "Is she serious?" A man muttered under his breath, "Classic HOA Karen." They recognized the type too. Everyone did. It wasn't the first time she'd pulled a stunt like this, though maybe it was the most public. Finally, she snapped her phone shut with a dramatic flourish. "The police are on their way," she declared triumphantly, folding her arms across her chest. "And when they get here, you'll be sorry. You don't belong here, and I'm going to make sure everyone sees it." Her son chuckled, whispering something under his breath that made her smirk. They looked like two villains in a cartoon, feeding off each other's arrogance. The manager sighed, rubbing his temples. The cashier glanced at me nervously, probably expecting me to yell back, to fight, to match Karen's energy. But I didn't. I simply stood tall, calm, and steady. Because I already knew how this story would end. I knew that within minutes, the officers she so desperately wanted to come would walk through those doors, and the entire script would flip. The curtain was about to fall on her performance, and she didn't even realize it. I could see the nervous energy buzzing in the air as customers whispered and pointed. The sound of distant sirens grew louder, closer, until finally, the flashing lights painted the windows of the store. Karen straightened her posture, her son grinned, and the crowd braced for a showdown. In her mind, she had won. She had called in the cavalry. She had the upper hand. She was about to see me dragged out of the store in front of everyone. But in reality, she had just set herself up for the most humiliating moment of her life. The sound of the sirens outside made the crowd shift with anticipation. You could feel the tension rising in the store, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the moment the police would come storming in. Karen stood proudly at the front of the line, chin lifted, chest puffed out, practically glowing with self-satisfaction. Her son had that same smug grin plastered on his face, as if they'd already won, as if they were seconds away from seeing me humiliated and dragged out like a criminal. What they didn't realize was that this was about to be the most humiliating moment of their lives, not mine. The automatic doors slid open and in walked two uniformed officers, calm but alert, scanning the scene. I knew both of them instantly. They worked under me. Good officers, disciplined, sharp, men I had mentored and guided since their first days on the force. The moment they spotted me, a flicker of recognition crossed their faces. They looked puzzled, probably wondering why their commander was standing in the middle of a grocery store surrounded by a gawking crowd while some woman was waving her arms around like she was the director of a play. Karen wasted no time. She rushed over to them, pointing at me like she was presenting evidence. "Officers! Officers, over here! That's him! Arrest this man right now!" Her voice was sharp, demanding, full of authority she didn't have. The officers looked from her to me, their brows furrowing in confusion. One of them started to ask, "Ma'am, what exactly happened?" but she cut him off, shoving her finger toward my chest. "What happened is that this man harassed my son, tried to steal from him, and became aggressive. I want him removed immediately. You need to do your jobs." The two officers exchanged a glance, and I could see the struggle on their faces as they tried to process the absurdity of the situation. They knew me, respected me, and here was this woman not only making false accusations but also trying to order them around like she had any authority over them. Still, they kept their composure, asking carefully, "Ma'am, are you absolutely sure this is the person you want to file a complaint against?" Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Of course I'm sure. Are you blind? He was threatening my son in front of everyone. You're wasting time, arrest him." Her son nodded eagerly behind her, his grin widening. He whispered something to her, and she smirked, convinced she was moments away from her victory. And that's when I decided it was time to end the charade. I reached into my pocket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out my badge. I held it up high enough for everyone in the store to see. The room fell silent. The officers' confused expressions immediately shifted into recognition and respect. The crowd gasped, whispers rippling through the aisles. Karen's confident smirk faltered. Her son's grin disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. "Karen," I said firmly, my voice calm but carrying enough weight to silence even the boldest heckler, "I am the police commander. These officers work under me. And you just tried to file a false police report." Her face drained of color in an instant. It was like watching a balloon deflate, all that arrogance, all that bravado, seeping out until she looked small, lost, and desperate. "Wait, what? No, that's impossible," she stammered, her words tumbling over each other as she tried to backpedal. Her son stood frozen, eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. The officers stepped forward, their postures straightening now that the truth was out. One of them spoke firmly, "Ma'am, do you understand how serious it is to make a false report? You just called us out here on a fabricated claim." His tone wasn't unkind, but it was heavy with the weight of reality. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't a neighborhood squabble she could spin to her advantage. This was law enforcement, and she had crossed a line. Karen's mouth opened and closed, no words forming. Her son muttered under his breath, "Mom, let's just go," but she wasn't ready to give up completely. She tried again, her voice trembling now. I didn't know. I just thought. I was protecting my son, but nobody in that store was buying it anymore. Everyone had seen how it played out. Everyone had heard her lies, her slurs, her entitlement. The performance was over, and the audience wasn't clapping. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough so it carried weight without needing volume. "You've wasted police resources, disrupted this entire store, and harassed an innocent man. And let's not forget, you tried to weaponize the system with your lies. That's not just embarrassing, it's a crime." The words hung in the air like a hammer over an anvil. Karen's face crumpled. She wasn't angry anymore. She was humiliated. The same woman who strutted through the neighborhood handing out threats and complaints like candy was now standing in the middle of a grocery store, exposed, cornered, and powerless. The officers, professional as ever, explained the severity of her actions. They told her plainly that making false reports was against the law, that her behavior could carry consequences far heavier than embarrassment. Karen's voice grew softer with every word. She wasn't demanding now. She was pleading. Please, Commander, I didn't mean it. It was just a misunderstanding. Please don't take this the wrong way. But it was too late. Everyone in that store knew exactly what had happened. The crowd that had once been silent with tension now looked at her with a mix of disgust and satisfaction. They'd seen her arrogance, her lies, her attempt to use authority she didn't have, and now they were seeing her unravel. Some of them even smiled, whispering to each other as though they couldn't wait to share the story when they got home. Her son, once so cocky, stood awkwardly by her side, his face pale, his shoulders hunched. He knew he couldn't save her, couldn't twist the truth anymore. The game was over. And the best part? I hadn't needed to raise my voice, hadn't needed to lose my temper. All it took was the truth, a badge, and a little patience for the entire house of cards to come crashing down. In the end, I didn't slap handcuffs on Karen right there in the middle of the grocery store, though the thought crossed my mind, and judging by the looks on the officers' faces, it crossed theirs too. But sometimes humiliation carries a weight that jail bars never could. And on that day, in that moment, Karen was already serving her sentence in the court of public opinion. I decided the right move was to issue an official warning, to put it on record, to make it clear that if she ever tried something like this again there would be no leniency. That way the consequences would hang over her head, a constant reminder that she couldn't weaponize lies or racism without paying a price. When I announced my decision, she sagged with visible relief, but it was a shallow relief because she could feel the heat of every set of eyes in that store boring into her, judging her, knowing her secret was out in the open. She and her son were escorted out, their heads hanging low, faces red as ripe tomatoes. No one offered them sympathy. No one defended them. Instead, as they shuffled toward the exit, one man near the front of the line started clapping slowly. At first it was just him, his palms echoing like little thunderclaps in the quiet store. Then another joined in, and another, until suddenly the whole checkout line erupted in applause. People clapped, some even cheered, and I could see smiles breaking out across the crowd. The sound rolled through the store, not for me, not even really for the police, it was for the justice they had just witnessed. It was for the simple, satisfying fact that arrogance had finally been put in its place. Karen kept her eyes glued to the floor, her son tugged at her arm, urging her to hurry, and together they disappeared out the sliding doors into the blinding sunlight, swallowed up by the silence that followed them outside. Once they were gone, the energy in the room shifted from tension to relief. The store manager hurried over to me, his face flushed with embarrassment for what had happened. "Commander, I am so sorry you had to deal with that here. Please, let me make this up to you, your groceries are on the house." I appreciated the gesture, but I shook my head. I didn't need free groceries. What I needed was exactly what had just happened, the truth coming out in front of everyone, the lesson being made crystal clear. I paid for my items like any other customer and thanked the staff for their patience. A few shoppers came up to me quietly as I left, some offering kind words, others just nodding respectfully, their eyes saying everything they didn't have to. Driving home with the bags in the back seat, I replayed the whole ordeal in my head. The arrogance of the son, the venom in his words, the entitled rage of Karen, the false report, the smugness that melted into shame when the truth was revealed. It all fit together like a scene from a play I hadn't asked to be part of. But more than anything, it reminded me of something I'd learned long ago: respect cannot be demanded, it has to be earned. Titles don't earn it, threats don't earn it, and arrogance sure doesn't earn it. People see through that eventually. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than I could have imagined. By the time the weekend was over, everyone on our block knew exactly what had gone down in that grocery store. They knew Karen had tried to pull her usual act of intimidation, but this time she had failed spectacularly. They knew her son had revealed his true colors in public, and they knew I had been the one standing there quietly, letting the truth expose itself. By Monday morning, Karen was no longer strutting around the neighborhood like she owned every mailbox and driveway. Instead, she barely peeked out of her blinds. She didn't storm around with her clipboard anymore, didn't send those aggressive HOA emails with the same energy. Her son, once loud and cocky, suddenly walked the neighborhood with his hood pulled low, no smirk in sight. It was like their little empire of arrogance had crumbled overnight. And honestly, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to rub it in. The humiliation alone was punishment enough. She had been exposed in the worst possible way, not in private, not behind closed doors where she could spin the story later, but in front of an entire crowd, with phones recording, with witnesses everywhere. Her lies had been shattered instantly, and no amount of gossip or spin could piece them back together. People had seen the truth with their own eyes, and that truth would stick to her far longer than any fine or citation. For me, the takeaway was simple, and it's one I hope everyone who saw that moment carried with them too. Power isn't about yelling the loudest or throwing around threats. Power isn't about privilege or status or acting like you're untouchable. True power is about composure, about patience, about standing tall when someone else tries to drag you down. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to flex my badge. All I needed was the truth and the confidence to let it shine. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not having Karen arrested on the spot. And my answer is always the same, no. Because what she experienced that day was worse for her than any fine or jail cell could have been. She lost her credibility. She lost her mask. She lost the image she had built up of being the queen bee of the neighborhood. And once you lose that kind of image, it's nearly impossible to get it back. That was her punishment, and it was one she carried every time she walked down the street after that. The groceries that day became more than just food in bags. They became a symbol of the line between arrogance and accountability, between lies and truth, between hate and justice. Karen and her son learned the hard way that you cannot bully your way through life forever. Sooner or later, the truth shows up. And in their case, the truth showed up in the form of the very police commander they thought they could intimidate. So the lesson is simple: treat people with respect, no matter who they are. Because you never know who you're talking to, and you never know when your lies might collapse in front of a crowd that will never forget it. And for Karen and her son, that lesson was carved into their lives in the most unforgettable way possible.